we had some major progressive wins this week. So shout out to Reed_Andrew on Twitter, who sent me this little graphic that you're about to see. These are the left-wing wins for the June 23rd elections. New York was one of the places where we had elections. We also had an election in Virginia. So here's some of the wins. You have Qasim Rashid, who won in Virginia's 1st district. Now, that's a heavily right-wing district, but he won the Democratic primary. He's definitely a left-wing candidate, Medicare for All supporting left-wing candidate. He's going to have an uphill battle in the general election, but nonetheless, he won the primary up against moderates. And I'm actually unsure of how many opponents he had, but he is the left candidate, and he won. That's obviously great news. What's hilarious, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she won her race, and there were Wall Street goons and many elitists who were just funneling massive amounts of cash into her opponent's campaign. Her opponent is a former CNBC anchor. I think her name is like Michelle Caruso Cabrera. AOC ran away with it. It was a landslide. It wasn't even close. What's so funny is that you had many commentators who really thought that AOC might go down because, there's a lot of negative press around her, because when you're young and you're outspoken and you're a lefty and you take no crap, oftentimes, people want you to shut up and fall in line and be a good little Democrat like the other Democrats. She gets from the Democratic establishment, and then she gets it even worse from like Fox News and the right. But she won with like 72% or something preposterous, so she crushed. Now here are the ones that are really, really, really awesome. Jamal Bowman beat Elliot Engel. Elliot Engel, is a longtime congressman, part of the Democratic establishment, and Jamal Bowman is an outsider, strong left-wing candidate. I couldn't be happier about that result, and he kind of crushed him. It's like he won with like 62% or something like that. So just amazing news. This is the exact kind of shot of adrenaline that the left needed, because, the left's been struggling recently, but then also 2020 has just spit in our eye and kicked us while we're down, and you got a depression, and you got a pandemic, and you got all this stuff going on. So we needed this good news, and thankfully we got it. And then we also have Mondaire Jones. That is in my district, and he's replacing a long-term Congresswoman, Nita Lowey. I'm very happy. I got to vote for Mondaire Jones. That made me very happy. I, of course, voted for Bernie Sanders, which was kind of bittersweet in the primary, but knowing that, he's not going to win. But I also voted for Mondaire Jones. He's a Bernie-endorsed candidate. He's pro-Medicare for all, and He's the first openly gay black man in Congress. So a bunch of firsts there. And he won pretty handily as well. These were pretty solid wins. Now, there were a bunch of so-called moderate candidates, establishment candidates, and so they kind of split their vote a little bit, which cleared the lane for the lefty. But still, it's still a large win regardless, so that's great. And then you have Dana Balter, Nate McMurray as well. These are, I believe, upstate New York districts. Then you have state and local level. You could see some of the names there. Some of them look familiar because they're pretty big on left-wing Twitter. You have Jabari Brysport. You have Julia Salazar. You have Alessandra Biaggi, Jessica Ramos, and the list goes on. These are so there were plenty of wins. Democratic Socialist wins, for example, at the state level. In fact, the left has been cleaning up for a while at the state and local level. But now it's nice that we get some prominent national victories, especially against somebody like Elliot Engel, who is abysmal. So there's a lot to be happy about. And now there's one other race that we're waiting on the final results. It's the Kentucky race, and Charles Booker is up against Amy McGrath, I think her name is, just a total establishment hack, totally useless. Charles Booker is the dynamic left-wing candidate. Now, as of right now, McGrath is leading, but basically none of the results are in yet from the most heavily pro-Charles Booker districts and areas. So Louisville hasn't come in yet, and there's some evidence or there's some reporting that Charles Booker picked up about 80% of Louisville, and if that's even close to correct, then Charles Booker is going to win. And that would be another amazing story. So he would be up against Mitch McConnell in the general. And man, listen, see, this is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for strong left-wing candidates to win, because these are candidates who really do represent the people and are really right in line with what all the polling data shows that your average American wants. So what happens when you have the old guard of the Republican Party, massively out of touch and corporatist, somebody like Mitch McConnell, up against a dynamic young left-wing candidate? See, the brilliance of having the left win the primaries is that you are then forcing the hand of Republicans to come out and make arguments against these common sense left-wing positions. Make Mitch McConnell argue against universal health care. Make him argue against a living wage. Make him argue against ending the wars. Make him argue against all that. Now, when they're running up against centrist Democrats, they don't have to make those arguments explicitly because the centrist Democrats aren't pushing those intelligent, common sense left-wing policies. But if you have a matchup where it's the left versus the right, yeah, he's going to have to make arguments against these positions, and Charles Booker will explicitly make the arguments for those positions. And my guess is, as soon as these ideas get a fair hearing and you tamp down on all of the outside forces that really try to hold the left back, then I think we could have some long-term wins, man. There's something that's unstoppable about the populist left. If you're on the left and you focus on the bread and butter economic issues, even, so-called moderate Republican voters go, I think that person's fighting for me. And they go in your direction. And then also, listen, this is on top of other left-wing victories that we've had this year. Shout out to Marie Newman, Paula Jean Swearingen as well. She won her primary. And Cara Eastman. Now, by the way, Cara Eastman has apparently said, and I was very happy to hear about this, Humanist Report reached out to me and told me about this, that Cara Eastman made a point of learning from the Bernie Sanders campaign failures. And she made a point of taking the advice of this show. Namely, yes, you run unapologetically on these left-wing policy issues, Medicare for all, free college, living wage, all the populist stuff. But you frame it as moderate. So that's the path she took. I'm going to argue for these really important social democratic left-wing positions, but all the polls show the majority of the American people believe in these positions, so she framed it as moderate, and she won. So you have a real-world example of this philosophy in action, this philosophy working. We have to get to the point where we simply don't care about the labels and signaling to our in-group subculture about how down we are with the struggle and how down we are with the left. We have to appeal to normie voters. And the way you appeal to normie voters is talk about these bread and butter issues, Medicare for all, free college, living wage, end the wars, infrastructure deal, so on and so forth, but call it moderate. Say, I'm the one who's got the common sense position. It's the so-called centrists who are elitists who are representing the will of the corporations and the mega rich. These are the arguments that work, and now we know for sure that that's the case. Now, beyond that, what we need to do is take this momentum and plow forward. Take this momentum, and you don't stop. Like, yes, we're going to have instances of giant left-wing losses, but we're also going to have instances of left-wing victories. And so you hold on to the good moments and you use it to fuel you moving forward. And, now in the future, we have Jen Perlman, for example, is up against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That's a really important race. It would be amazing to take her down. You guys should help out Jen Perlman however you can. Cori Bush is running again, one of the original Justice Democrats. I hope she wins her race. And then you also have probably the one that everybody's talking about the most, Shahid Buttar up against Nancy Pelosi. Can you imagine the sheer panic that would jolt through Washington, D.C. and Wall Street and the elitist centers of power if we take down Nancy Pelosi and replace Nancy Pelosi with a real lefty? See, this is what I'm saying, man. Make them argue against the best of us. The best of us. Shahid Buttar arguing for all the right policies. Make them argue against them, because then they look stupid. And that's when we win in the long run. So, listen. These are great results. If you lose once, try again. If you lose a second time, try again. If you lose a third time, you try again. Because the Democratic establishment, they're paper tigers. They're not bulletproof. In the same way that Trump managed to, get through the Republican establishment when they did not want him. The moneyed interest in the Republican Party did not want him. They wanted Marco Rubio. They wanted Jeb Bush. They would have accepted Ted Cruz. But they got Trump. In the same way that he could take them down. Now, by the way, he serves them, just to be clear. He ran as an outsider. Now he's the ultimate insider. But for us, we'll never be insiders. We will always be outsiders. But keep fighting. Eventually, you'll win. One of the things that nobody talks about in elections is that name recognition is huge. So if you run 2 or 3 times, you might not win. But by the 4th time or the 5th time, people see that name, they recognize that name, then you're much more likely to win. There's plenty of people who run for office and they don't win 3 or 4 times, and then they win. So keep showing up. Never take no for an answer. Never settle. If you keep showing up, they can't deny you. Now, the final thing I'll bring up is, why now? What is it about this moment in history that appears to finally have people, at least for this one election cycle, coming to their senses? And listen, I think the answer is hiding in plain sight. The first thing is there's a pandemic. There's a pandemic. Over 120,000 Americans have died. Over 2 million Americans have it. When people are struggling, when people are hurting, they tend to want candidates who feel that hurt and want to do something to alleviate it. You're not going to get that from Republicans, and you're not going to get that from corporate Democrats. You're only going to get that from people like Jamal Bowman. The other thing is, there's an economic depression. We have the real unemployment rate is over 20%. The real unemployment rate. That's above the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession. That's above that. So you have a pandemic and you have an economic depression, which means average people are hurting, so they're looking for real solutions. Where are you going to get the real solutions from? People like Jamal Bowman, the left. And then the other thing is, in the era of Trump, the polls are really showing now that people want the exact opposite of Trump. So, and it looks like they're actually settling ideologically for the exact opposite of Trump. So they want total change, and that's helping the left. And then I'd say the fourth thing is the protests. I think that with sort of like a left-wing resurgence, it's moving the Overton window. And this is the trick that the right has been so good at for decades, where they have like these legitimately insane people on the far right saying insane things, but then your average run-of-the-mill Republican has to run further right, at least in rhetoric, to accommodate the people who are the activists on the right. Well, now you have loud, aggressive, obnoxious, left-wing protesters who, in many ways, I actually think are unreasonable, who maybe are overly focusing on issues I wouldn't necessarily focus on, or, the main thing has become now they're not just pulling down Confederate statues, they're just pulling down statues. Like, we could talk about that later, but they're pulling down Confederate statues, and then now they also pulled down the statue of the general who defeated the Confederacy. Like, what? Okay. So they're just anti-statue. So in some ways, and the whole defund the police movement, it sounds really extreme. It sounds like abolish the police. That is not a position that polls well. But what's happened is, because you have these protesters in the streets, they have dragged the Overton window to the left. So now even the Republicans are going, no, don't defund the police, but we'll do police reform. We'll do police reform. Do you have any idea? Not in a million years would I have thought that Republicans would ever say, yeah, I'm for police reform. What's made them do that is that the left-wing activists have gone so far left on this that they're dragging everybody to meet them halfway, and the halfway position actually has pretty intelligent policies associated with it. So the protests are leading to a resurgence of the left. I would say, thankfully, it's not like these lefties are running on abolish all statues or anything like that, but they're really running on actual solutions to all of our problems. And so in that sense, I totally support the protests, even though I might disagree with them on many things. And even though I think it's kind of crazy to be out there with COVID happening and everybody should wear a goddamn mask and socially distance. Like, we're not playing around here, folks. It's dumb when the right-wingers do it. It's stupid when the left-wingers do it too. So if you're going to protest, socially distance and wear the masks. But other than that, it is working in the sense that it's dragging the Overton window to the left. And now you see these rise of really good, strong, populist left candidates, and I love it. So we have good news. Let's keep the good news going forward, and it's nice to get a little bit of relief from how treacherous 2020 has been.